Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Hokyoji Sunday Dharma talk. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Jushin Stephyn Butcher, who started his Buddhist journey over 25 years ago in the Tibetan tradition. He found his way to Hokyoji, where he became a student of Reverend Dokai Georgesen. That's me. Jushin received jukai in 2013 and ordination in 2017. He's currently the Hokyoji's board president. He hosts a sitting group on the banks of the Choptank River in Cambridge, Maryland, where he resides with his husband, dog, chickens, and garden. So, Jushin, thank you for um, your presence today and your willingness to give us a talk on the Dharma, and I will turn it over to you.
All right.
Thank you
Good
so
morning.
much.
Thank you for your introduction, Dokai. Can you hear the air conditioner in the background? No. Okay. So the non-musician sound is working. It's doing its thing. So good morning, everyone. Welcome from not quite the banks of the Choptank. They're about 3 blocks that way. This morning,
You muted yourself, Jushin.
Yeah.
oh no, my notebook I said
Okay. Original sound. Okay,
No,
now I'm unmuted.
we're
Can
good.
someone who tell me what I might be doing wrong?
No, you
I
didn't
mean,
do
we
anything. I
can't I
set my
can't hear
notebook.
you, Jushin. Is there something on my end I have to do? Mute, ask to unmute. Spotlight, make host, rename. We've never had this issue arise before.
We can hear you, Dokai, and we can hear Jushin.
My vow.
So is it only Dokai that can't hear me?
Well, I can hear you.
You can hear me. Okay. Yeah, but he's recording. Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear everything. What happened? Well, maybe we need to edit this out of your talk, but
I'll edit it out later.
uh,
Yeah, I think I set my notebook on my computer keyboard and it muted me.
oh, wow. Okay. All right. Okay.
That's when you're combining the analog with the digital.
All right. Okay.
Let me try again. I'll cut out all the other part. Good morning, everyone, from the not quite banks of the Choptank. They're about 3 blocks that way. I can see them if I stand out in the middle of the road, which is not suggested. So this might be, I don't know, I'm trying to work on something here. It might be a series. The title is Buddha was born in Kapilavastu. And I am hoping to start a series of actually maybe kind of the history of Buddhism. It kind of struck me as I was reading some things, how kind of interesting the past is, and the very distant past we were talking about, and how some of the themes they echo throughout history. And I think it's part of it is certainly for myself, where there's a tendency to think of, ancient civilizations, the ancient world as being, I don't know, not necessarily backward, but we have maybe an over romantic notion of our own progress and how maybe undeveloped the past was. So I'm going to start back in history. I'm going to actually start very far back in history right now, about 300,000 years ago. About 300,000 years ago, we have the rise of Homo sapiens in Africa. And strangely, we are not the first hominids. So about 70,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens leave Africa, at that time, there are 7 species of hominids in the world. They're the Neanderthals you probably heard of, and Denisovians you may not have heard of. But there were others, and there were including basically hobbits in Indonesia. They were only about 4 foot tall, but they were archaic humans. And so Homo sapiens, we leave Africa and we spread all over the world, down into Australia, into North America. That number is being pushed back. Originally, it was around 17,000 BCE, and now it's about probably around 30,000 BCE. There are footprints of all that's left are just the footprints of families walking in the mud in White Plains. I guess that's what, New Mexico. For perspective, the last ice age ended only 12,000 years ago. So relatively soon, or not that long ago, and the agricultural revolution was again about 10,000 years ago. And the agricultural revolution plays sort of a key role in all of this because you can't support high population density with generally a hunter-gatherer society. Hunter-gatherer societies, I think we tend to romanticize them a little bit by saying they lived in harmony with nature. A lot of times they kind of lived in at the whim of nature. If you don't have surplus food, if you're not able to build up some population density, then small changes in climate, well, weather, can wipe you out, can wipe you out. So about 10,000 years ago, we have the agricultural revolution. About 5,000 years after that, we have the rise of the first civilizations. So Mesopotamia is about 4,000 BCE. Egypt is about 3,100 BCE. Fun fact, if you want to amaze people at cocktail parties, Cleopatra is closer to us than the construction of the Great Pyramids. So the Great Pyramids are constructed in about 2,600 BCE, and Cleopatra died in 60 BCE, so very close to 0. And so she is 600 years closer to us than she is to the building of the Great Pyramids. And let's see, China is about 2,000 BCE, Peru 1,200 BCE, Mesoamerica 1,200 BCE, but probably more germane to us from a Buddhist talk is the Indus Valley civilization. So India has 2 great alluvial plains. One is from the Indus River, which runs through basically present-day Pakistan and the Punjab province of India. And then there is the Ganges, the Gangetic Plains, which is actually the Buddhist stomping grounds, which runs across the top of northern India and into Bangladesh. So that's the Ganges. So the Harappa and the Indus Valley civilization is about 3,300 BCE. The height was 2,600. They had writing, they had indoor plumbing, they had artisans. It was a full-fledged, it was just like the civilizations of that time. I like the way they call it hydraulic engineering. So I don't think they wanted to say that they had indoor plumbing in 3,300 BCE, since we didn't have it in the Middle Ages here in Western Europe. But all of that is lost with the collapse of these civilizations. And it's a little weird because all of these civilizations arise at roughly the same time. They all collapse at roughly the same time. And in fact, technologies are lost. Writing is lost. the ability, the knowledge, the technology to fire bricks is lost. So, don't want to get ahead of myself, too far ahead of myself, but by the time of the Buddha, nothing is made out of brick. They don't know how to make bricks anymore. So everything's made out of wood and bamboo and mud. About 5,000 to 4,000 BCE, we have the rise. So this is a little bit before the great civilizations. We have the Yamnaya culture in essentially what is today Ukraine. So in the Pontic steppes. And this has major repercussions for the world because they're the Aryans. And over the next 2,000 to 3,000 years, they are going to expand and explore out. They're going to make it all the way to the British Isles. And they're going to make it all the way at about 2000 BCE. They're going to make it into northern India. And they bring with them the Vedic culture. And at the time of the Buddha, this integration is still happening. One of the things they can tell how far it gets is whether or not the Brahmins are at the top of the rung or the second rung. And in at least in the Buddhist time, they're still the Brahmins are still the second rung. Let's see. So one of the big things I'm going to talk today, I'm going to talk mostly about social, political, economic, and religious elements up to the time of the Buddha. So urbanization. So this is the second wave of urbanization. The Indus Valley civilization has risen and collapsed. We have had the infiltration in northern India. That is the Aryans, and bringing with them the Vedic culture. There is a political change from pastoral republics, generally a little more democratic, not like we would think of as democracies, but even at the time of the Buddha, Sudana is not actually a king. He is a Raja, and he is elected by his peers in the warrior class. And they don't have democracy yet. They have consensus. And somebody describes it it's kind of funny. They describe it as the idea that the majority could impress its ideas on the minority hadn't arisen to them yet. What they generally did was they ruled by consensus, so that you either got everybody to agree or you exhausted your detractors. They just finally gave up. So ostensibly everything was sort of done by consensus. So you're moving from these pastoral republics to these urban aristocracies. At the time of the Buddha, Sakya is a sort of semi-autonomous region. It is a vassal state of Kosala. So Kosala is the big kingdom of the day. It is the place that actually has a king at that time. And again, all of this is required, like as you move from hunter-gatherer to agricultural to urbanization, to have a surplus, that you can have division of labor, and all of these certain things. Now, I overlaid a map of India over the Midwest, just explicitly for this audience. It's not going to mean anything to Aaron or me, because I don't even necessarily know where these places are myself. But what I put Kushinagara on La Crosse. So La Crosse is Kushinagara. So when we say Kapilavastu is basically a little southeast of Red Wing. And so that was the seat, that was the capital of Shakya. But Buddha wasn't, by tradition, he's actually not born there. He's actually born closer to his mother's home area of Lumbini, and that is just north of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. So that's how far away that is. Again, I mentioned Kosala is actually where the king is in Shravasti. That's Minneapolis, St. Paul. So give you an idea of where these things are. Varanasi is in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Rajagriha is in Dixon, Illinois. I don't know if anybody knows where that is. It's kind of it's almost exactly midway between Chicago and Davenport, if that helps. Nalanda is a little north of that. And Bogaya is in Clinton, Iowa. It's right on the border between Iowa and Illinois. So Kosala basically, Kosala, the kingdom of Kosala is basically running from Minneapolis, St. Paul towards Nebraska. And the other big kingdom is Magadha. And that's basically across eastern Iowa and northern Illinois. So hopefully it gives you an idea of kind of like, and the Buddha walks all of these places over his 80-year time. So the main kingdoms are Kosala and Magadha. At the time of the Buddha's birth, Mahakosala is the king of Kosala, and Bhattiya is the king of Magadha. I'll probably get into the other kings later. Socially, so let me. So there are cities. The cities are arising. Cities tend to be on riverbanks. They have rectangular layouts, and they have moats around them that are filled by the rivers. They're always tend to be built on riverbanks for travel. A lot of people are sailing up and down the Ganges. They have within arrow shot of each other, they're going to have towers. There's a palace, but again, palaces are, I don't know if anyone's ever seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but there's a line where one of the peasants says, "How do you know he's a king?" And the other one goes, "Because he doesn't have dirt on him." And that's sort of basically how, I mean, obviously everybody is at a lower level economically than we are now, but the difference between the levels at the time is not that great. This is a lot later, but just to give you an example of how income distribution has changed over the years. At the height of the Roman Empire, 1%, the top 1% owned 16% of the wealth. In the United States today, the top 1% have 40% of the wealth. So, so the distribution wasn't that. So they're not in like palaces like we think of, like maybe Taj Mahal-ish type stuff today, which is actually a mausoleum, but that's a different story. But they're wooden buildings, so they're not going to be living in bamboo and wattle huts. But you have wooden buildings, multiple buildings. You're going to have a meadow for the Vedic sacrifices, and we're going to talk a lot about that in a minute. And you have a town bazaar, and as you move out, you have everybody, all the carpenters live near each other, all the jewelers live near each other, and you get outside the city walls, and then you have like the farmers and people who are living in villages. There's almost always also a courtesan, who is the most refined lady of the town, and will basically teach the young aristocrats manners. So that's sort of the economics. There are four robes. There are basically four social classes at this time. There are the Brahmins, the warriors, kind of farmers, merchants, and the servants / untouchables. They're not really the untouchables yet. That'll come later. Yeah, so that's the basic economics of the time. So I think for us, the major thing, so well, there's two things for my long story. One is just, it's not really different than today. So there's always there's a running joke where it's like we run on cave person software with medieval institutions and godlike technology. And certainly after about 50,000 years ago, there was a cognitive revolution. Nobody knows why. But if you took a baby from 30,000 years ago and gave them sort of modern nutrition and everything, they would not be different than any of us. So there hasn't been that kind of change. There have been a few innovations. About 10,000 years ago, we got blue eyes. And a few areas of the world developed lactose tolerance. So-called lactose intolerance is actually the default. So that's why most people in the world are lactose intolerant. It's the lactose tolerant who have the mutation. But so there's very little. People are very likely having the same hopes and dreams and that kind of thing. So now I want to move now to the sort of religious background, because this sets the stage for the Buddhas, for the Buddha. And that starts with Vedic Brahmanism, which is not Hinduism. It's not Hinduism yet. So again, this is coming into India from the Aryan invaders. And over, at this point, sort of hundreds of years, is becomes part of the social fabric of northern India. And there's a focus on ritual and maintaining the cosmic order. This comes from the Rig Veda and the other Vedas, which are very much keyed on language. They're keyed on mudra, what we would called later mantra and mudra. So there's, you got to say the right thing at the right time, doing the right sacrifices in the right way. And there's a focus on cause and effect. A correctly performed ritual, mantra, mudra, the right person doing it, ritually clean, will always bring about the same result. And these results are sacrifices to the devas. So these are the gods, but they're not gods in a monotheistic way. They're probably closer to the Greek gods and those kinds of gods, and probably for the same reasons, since the Greeks are also descendants of the Aryans. These sacrifices are made to maintain the cosmic order. And this is, in fact, the focus of Vedic Brahmanism. We have to maintain the cosmic order. We have to keep the cosmic clock running. And it has to be kept running in exactly this way. So it's also a maintenance of the status quo. And the status quo is Rita, which eventually comes to be called Dharma. So we have to maintain the Dharma. We have to do this. It becomes a morality because maintaining the universal clockwork becomes a moral and a normative question. To not do your duty, to not make these sacrifices threatens the cosmic order. And, you know, who would want to do that, right? Philosophical speculation tends to focus on the nature of the cosmos. Where did the universe come from? What is its unifying substance? What is its coordinating power? So it's all very kind of otherworldly. Dharma is associated with eternal truth. So Dharma is the eternal truth in Vedic Brahmanism. And we want to maintain it. Later, this becomes a more personal, in the sense that not only do you have the Dharma as cosmic truth, but you have your own Dharma. So own Dharma it's kind of like hyphenated, own Dharma, is doing your part in the cosmic machinery. And much later in what will be called the law books, and this actually becomes the law of India until the end of colonialism, in Indian independence, it is better to do your own duty badly than to do someone else's duty well. So you're born into a spot in society, and it's your job to fulfill that role and to keep the cosmic order going. And part of that is also the Rig Veda specifies the 4 classes, much more to the west of northern India. This is when the Brahmas get to the first rung. They're the mouth. So there's a cosmic person, and the Brahmins are the mouth. The warrior class are the arms. The farmers and merchants are the thighs, and the servants, slaves are the feet. And you've got to keep that cosmic person going. Family life is central to this because it becomes almost a religious duty to keep the cosmic order going, that you marry, you have sons to preserve the cosmos. So you got to get married, you got to do your role. It's all about maintaining a social structure which takes on a religious component. So a central part of this is sacrifice and fire. And so, of course, we won't get to it today, but there's a reason why the Buddha talks about fire so much. Because fire was central to Vedic Brahmanism. So you have the sacrifices in the town hall, in the town meadow, you had 3 fires. And again, as a household, as being a mirror of society, you always kept 3 fires burning. One of them was your hearth. So hearth is one of the 3 fires. You're always keeping it burning. A man's duty as a householder was to keep that fire burning throughout their life. So again, the social and the religious are just completely mixed. Like they wouldn't think of them as different like we do today. These rituals become more complicated over time. And you can imagine that there's probably some point in the past where it's kind of like some admonition to always keep a fire lit becomes sort of like ritualized, where it's like, well, we need to like, I'm going to do a little offering here of special wood to the deity to keep the fire lit, to this point where you have the Vedic architectronic, where there's multiple priests and everything is said in precise Sanskrit. And so even a householder who is trying to do a sacrifice, he doesn't actually do the sacrifice part. So he oversees it, but he has to have a priest come in and do it. So the priest has to come in and say the right words in the right order. And at some point, fire actually becomes its own deity, Agni. And so kind of the fun thing is that because of the Aryan, what they call the Kurgan hypothesis, this is why there are common words, common roots to Latin and Sanskrit. So Agni is ignite. So that's how we have, in India, you have Agni and the fire god. And today we have the English word, which comes the Latin ignite. So fire becomes a deity. You have this whole social infrastructure made up to preserve language. And this is why, to a large extent, you have this ability to memorize large and long texts. Because it's important from generation to generation, these spells and incantations are said exactly the same way. There's ostensibly no room for personal innovation. And it gets so bad, probably at the time just before the Buddha, that the Brahmins believed themselves to be higher than the gods because the gods couldn't get along without their offerings. And if you didn't have the Brahmins to make the offerings, then the gods couldn't get along. So the Brahmins were like, we're actually the ones keeping the universe running. At some point, just kind of a little bit before the Buddhist time, there were innovations, not in Brahmanism itself. There were the Upanishads. And these have a completely different tone than the Vedas. So they originated outside Vedic Brahmanism, but they eventually become integrated into Vedic Brahmanism, and they shift. They shift from the cosmic to the personal. So, and they shift from priestly activity to personal experience. So it's an origination of things which we would call today the yogas. So we have yogic techniques that focus on knowing the absolute truth about reality. So what's interesting is the cycle of lives, personal karma, these are not in the Vedas. These come from the Upanishads, and they get integrated. So that not only do you have your role in society as prescribed by the Vedas, you have to do it lifetime over lifetime over lifetime. So, and there is a move or an addition of karma as sort of understood as ritual actions of sacrifice having consequences, to karma as being personal, everyday actions that have consequences. And they have consequences in the future, and that future includes future lives. And this future lives is samsara, and escape from samsara is moksha. So the only way to escape samsara is direct knowledge of metaphysical truth. It's seeing into the essence of one's nature. And according to the Upanishads, seeing your nature is that your essence, your Atman, is identical to the essence of the absolute, which is Brahman. And how do you get this direct knowledge? We get this through meditation. Mostly meditation, mental practices, some physical practices. And so we get this shift of something that we're very familiar with today, that the truth is not something you know about. The truth is something that you know of through direct experience. Now there's even well, let's see, I can't get to there yet. Okay, so that's we have the Vedic stream, and the Upanishads come into that. And then just before the Buddhist time, and again, this is probably, these sorts of things tend to be tied to economic conditions. Where things are economically going very well, you tend to have these outpourings of social differences, countercultures. And so we saw this in the 60s in the United States with the post-war boom, post-World War II boom. It's probably the best the economy has ever been from not for everyone, of course, but in general, we end up with this with a surplus, which tends to lead to countercultures. And in northern India at this time, and this is just before the Buddhist time, probably 600 BCE, we have the wanderers, the shramanas. And they completely reject the Vedic teachings and take the Upanishadic teachings to heart. And so they are all about rejecting anything that's in the Vedas. And this rejection is the rejection of being a householder. Because remember, householding is a religious vocation at this point. So they're rejecting being a householder. They're rejecting sacrifice. So they're rejecting marriage and householding in general. They're rejecting sacrifice and they reject priests. So all of this architectonic that comes from Vedics, and they're concentrating entirely on the shamanas, on the Upanishadic teachings, Upanishadic teachings. And the focus is on developing mental acuity and concentration, and at different levels. No sexual pleasures, no sensual pleasures, no sense pleasures, and basically no safety. So you have the people who are doing mutilation, self-mutilation, and living outside of shelters. They sleep in brambles, on beds of nails, and those kinds of things. So we have this shift that's coming where the central purpose of the human being is to know thyself. But not everyone is coming up with the same answers. So that's one of the downsides, I guess, to I don't know if anarchy is the right word, but two broad classes. You have the eternalists, which believe that the soul, which is jiva, the soul goes on. You have the annihilationists, which also believe in the soul, but they believe that the soul dies. When you die, your soul dies. And it leads to the four great questions. And the four great questions are: is the universe eternal or not? Is it finite or not? So we have to remember, in Indian logic, it's either something is either the case, not the case, both the case and not the case, or neither the case and not the case. So this is the quadrilemma. We only have dilemmas in the West, but we have quadrilemmas in India. So everything is that way. It's the universe. Is it finite or not, eternal or not, neither finite nor eternal, and the others. We have the soul. Is it separate from the body? And then the question of, does the person exist after death? Liberated person, do they exist after death? Do they not exist after death? Neither exist nor not exist, both not exist and exist. So that gets us to the wanderers. And this is the culture into which the Buddha was born. And this is the philosophical framework into which the Buddha begins his teaching. And so that will have to be part 2. I don't want to have to leave a cliffhanger. It's a lot of background. But yeah, so there are a lot of interesting things here, and I'll just mention one. This tension between ritual and personal experience seems to repeat itself. It's interesting that, Buddhism eventually dies out in India in favor of things, certainly when Vedic Brahmanism becomes Hinduism, a little more ritualistic. Muslim invasions bring in Islam. But Buddhism does die out in India. But even by that time, the Buddhism of that time, and hopefully I'll get to that someday, does seem to be a little bit more ritualistic, like Tantra becomes a little seemingly more ritualistic. But the funny thing is I was talking to, I was at MZMC 2 weeks ago, and I was talking to Ted, right? Is that who I was talking to? And he was talking about, I guess it's Kazon, right? I don't know. And so compared to Dogen, he is popularizing Soto Zen, and this is getting very far ahead of myself. He's popularizing Soto Zen by adding ritual. So I was talking to Ted afterwards. I go, I think it's kind of ironic that we're popularizing Zen today by removing ritual. So, but there's a lot of interesting things I think that are here in different ways. So, for example, I know that there are people who are not fond that much of ritual, but my feeling on it is actually that ritual is actually yogic, and not because I don't actually believe I'm propitiating anybody. Like they probably did in medieval Japan, but I don't. So I see it as more yogic practice. So it'd be interesting to see what anyone else thinks about these things. So I'll open up to questions. And then, part 2 will be in June-ish. There are no questions about the grand scope of human history up to 6,000 BCE. Really? Dokai.
Yeah, I appreciate this kind of educational talk, Jushin. I began studying Buddhism when I was quite young, maybe 21, something like that, and I only had studied for a few months at San Francisco Zen Center, and then all the rest of the time at Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. So that's the only experience I had. And Katagiri Roshi never really emphasized reading history so much. He would talk about different texts, um, but he didn't give it a historical context that I was aware of. So in my late 20s, I took a pilgrimage to India, which initially was supposed to last for about 2.5 months, but turned into 2 years. And that's what India does to you. It's like you're there, and well, that's what it did for me. In any event, I took actually a college semester course through a college, and one of the courses was to study the history, much as you have just laid out. And some of it, I remember from that time, and you've added some new things. But one thing I do remember, I still have those two books, and one's called The Wonder That Was India, and other one is called I don't know what it's called. It's just the economics of India at the time, and it was really, really a dry, boring book because it was just total economics. But that's the first time I really did learn that in order to have monks, you got to have a surplus in your culture. And it made sense to me, but, I kind of thought, no, no, before that, it's like, oh, we're, above all the economic stuff, and no, we're not. I mean, everything is, you can't have monks running around if you're just a hunter and gatherer because there's nothing extra to give you for begging for your food or to support you in any way. So those were great revelations for me. And yeah, I still have those two books right in my library right here at Hokyoji. And yeah, I think it's really important to have some historical background about all this so we don't get so I don't know, too elevated in our consciousness about that we think we're doing something outside of the ordinary. So fortunately in Zen, it said, what is the way? Well, ordinary mind is the way. So so I can appreciate that. Well, anyway, thank you for your talk. It's bringing back a lot of memories for me and my study of which I haven't, academic study of which I haven't done a lot of recently. So it's inspiring for me to maybe I got to pick up a little more history books, even study more like the history of China, the history of Japan too, as it relates to Buddhism. So just to get a pretty grounded view of everything that's going on. So thank you. Thank you for your talk.
Yeah, part of this arises from my own experience, again, as the introduction said, in Tibetan Buddhism, where not only are we told, and I won't get to the Buddhist story until next time, but not only are we told the story that you hear, which is, he was a prince and he gave up everything in the four sites and all of that, but he wasn't actually human. He was an emanation, and what they jokingly call the movie. Like, it was because you end up with these weird, if you push some of these things a little too hard, you end up in sort of this scholastic questions of like, how does the last bodhisattva get enlightened? It's like, well, there are no more sentient beings. And the answer, of course, is all the Buddhas are emanating sentient beings for out of compassion, so that the last bodhisattva can get enlightened. And it's like, oh gosh, and for me at least, it was just like, well, if the Buddha wasn't just a regular person, what's the point? Like, that's cheating. And so to me, I think it's refreshing to go to think, and then of course the countervailing thing is sometimes to think about the ancient world as being just like, barely above monkeys. I don't know, and it just humanizes it all. It kind of just grounds it. Like, we're just part of a big history, not even just a big history of Buddhism, but a big history of just humanity.
I'll just add, I forgot to say so, and I'll stop and we can have other people comment. But yeah, another thing that is that having only been exposed to Buddhism at essentially Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, and then going to Bodh Gaya, India, and seeing how Buddhism was manifested in so many different ways. I mean, that I could not even imagine. I thought, and I go around and look, and I'd say, this isn't Buddhism, So, but it really was, and I did experience how it's it has a different relationship to different cultures, and uh, and I don't think I'm making it a stretch to say in some cultures, Buddha is regarded as a god. It's just, it's the, and I think that's was quite evident just how I could see people just praying to Buddha. It was in the temples and making offerings and things like that. And, that's okay. I'm not going to criticize that at all, but it was just interesting to see how different it is practice around the world. And in Bodh Gaya is interesting because even though Buddhism doesn't exist, in any kind of prevalent way in India now, in Bodh Gaya, it's like this. You get every temple from all over the world. They have their own little temples. The Zen Buddhists, the Tibetans have like about 20 temples there, and Sri Lanka, China, Japan, Thailand, Myanmar, every single country has their own cultural temple there. So you see all these different expressions, and it was very interesting. It opened up my eyes beyond anything that I think could have happened if I hadn't not have gone there. So, well, thank you again, and I'll be quiet now. Let her.
I think Tim was going to say something.
Yeah, so when I was getting to know my wife, Teresa, we went to Cedar Rapids Zen Center a few times together. So she could kind of see what I was into. And at one point we were having a conversation. I told her one reason I really like Zen was there wasn't a whole lot of ritual. And she said, "What? What are you talking about? There's an incredible amount of ritual." Um, and actually here, 25, 30 years later, she'll still bring that up from time to time. It like still just like amazes her that I would say. And I think even now when I thought actually that was kind of an odd thing to say, but I think it has to do with that it's not ritual like in the Vedas, like burning the fires like magic in order to keep the universe going. It's something more personal and arbitrary, on that individual path. But um, yeah, it amuses her to no end that I said there was not a lot of ritual in Zen, and I have been admonished not to say that again.
Well, if you take her to a Tibetan temple, she will see that there's not a lot of ritual in Zen.
Yeah, I think she compared it though to churches she'd been to, and she's like, "Oh, this is crazy amount of ritual."
Yeah.
Enter the room a certain way, walk around a certain direction, have to lean your sutra books up against the wall that can't lay flat against the floor, and yada yada.
I mean, I sort of, I mean, and it gives, I think it's an interesting thing, but I think knowing about the tension between yogic and ritual, I guess, or I don't know what I would call the other. I do. It's like I would always much rather be Doan than anything, because to me, it's there is a yogic practice to like doing the bell and singing and trying to harmonize. And I think if I think one of the challenges when we do sesshin is we're a bunch of people who have not practiced together often, not chanted together often. So people aren't comfortable enough to get to the next level where it's like, I know the words, and now I'm going to actually try and harmonize with my neighbor. I know for many years when I would attend sesshin, because it was only basically one a year, service was mostly just panic. Like, am I going to do the right thing? I'm going to say the right thing. What's the word? Whatever. And I just find, once you practice it, then it's like, oh, okay, I get it. Yes, Mary.
Loved your Dharma talk. Thank you so much. Um, I'm reading a book right now on the Dalai Lama. I mean, the Dalai Lama has written it, and I'm learning about Tibetan Buddhism, and some of it's just like, whoa, okay. But what I wanted to say was, the ritual aspect of Buddhism, just the history of ritual that you describe. I think of ritual sometimes as, fear-based. And you brought this up, depending on the religion or the practices, if you don't do the ritual to perfection or in the right order, or you do it wrong, then you're punished. And so much of, like, for me personally, with my childhood religion, my heritage, there was a lot of guilt and worry if you didn't do the ritual in the correct order, or you missed it, or you did something. So then your mind is just completely absorbed with this craziness, and you miss the point of any of it. But I was thinking of ritual sometimes as a power, like power concentrates. So you can get powerful people to say you have to do ritual in this manner. They keep the power because everybody's afraid of not following the ritual. And that's not what I've experienced in Buddhism, but when I started practicing, that was my sort of, the feelings came up. So that's what I wanted to say about ritual. But thank you so much.
Well, I mean, we can't so one of the interesting things, I think, and it's hard because it's a tension we have today between individualism and collectivism. So when you go back to hunter-gatherer, where everything was probably mostly small bands, so about half of our brain is geared towards social interaction, social cues. That's why we feel shunning, and it's why road rage kinds of things make us feel good, even though it doesn't have any practical benefit, because we're kind of used to if people step out of line, it could have meant the death of the collapse of the group, which tend to be about 30 people with very larger clans, larger groupings of 300. And, we're basically evolved to that. We know we can keep track of about 300 people, what our social structure is, interaction is, what their relationship to us are, and then that's about it. And then to get large scale human culture, you need culture. Society, you need that culture. And to get everybody, I tell my students at the beginning of the semester, I need you all contacting me the same way because I need all the fish swimming in the same direction. I love you, you're an individual, bloom, but everybody's got to do the same thing. Y'all have to email me the same way. Don't pick one way to contact me and another way. So we do have this tension between the collective and the individual. And I think that's where ritual originally is coming from. It's a very practical idea of how do we get 1,000 people moving in basically the same direction? How do we get 10,000 people moving in basically the same direction? Now, the United States today, what is that? 330 million people, all basically going in the same direction with, individual variation. And, it's ebbed and our success is ebbed and flowed over the years. Apparently we're at a low. Our last low was the Civil War. And then we went up and now we're back down again. So, I can see the fear-based aspect of it. I can see the practicality of it. So yeah. Yeah, so from a very personal level, there's fear. But from a societal level, you do kind of need all the fish swimming in the same direction or chaos ensues.
We're coming to the end of our time here.
I think
And
Rushin has a comment.
okay. Let's do that for sure.
Well, I have two things. With all these fires, there was deforestation of India during this time?
Yeah, so the Gangetic Plain used to be heavily forested, and today it is completely deforested.
Yeah, okay. So in college, I took a course from Dr. David White, who was a Sanskrit scholar and spent his whole life on the Bhagavad Gita, which is it's kind of just at this crux of this Upanishad, but at the same time, the Vedic traditions, because the Gita brings out there's 4 yogic paths: scholarship, devotion, action, and meditation. But at the same time, Krishna is Arjuna's chariot driver and keep having to convince Arjuna, oh no, you've got to take place in this battle. It's your job to be a warrior, and you've got to fill your role. And so it's like this at that point in history. And so I know Brad Warner, when he was here, when we got to talking stuff, and he was really interested in this background stuff, and he assumed that I knew all this background stuff because of going through the Gita class, and Dr. White might have known all that stuff and did teach you know, Vedic. And so I remember some of that stuff, but it's not to the level that Brad really wanted it. So you should get in touch with Brad about this.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, I think we're going to move toward closure for today's Sunday's talk. Just to let you all know, events happening here at Hokyoji right now. There's an event going on. It's a Qigong group. It ends later today. Next week, there's a healing Tai Chi and yoga retreat. It's a private retreat. So I'm just telling you, even if it's private, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And then after that, a Minnesota contemplative retreat, and it's called Centering Prayer Retreat. It might have some Christian centering there. I don't know much about it. And I'm not sure how you would register for it. It's not a Hokyoji event, but you can research it if you would like. You can go to our website under events. It's there. Then on the 9th of May, we have a Naturally Awake retreat happening with Rise Mark Anderson. On the 16th, at Hokyoji True Hearts Women's Retreat. And then after that, in May, Just Sitting, May 26th, a Just Sitting retreat. So that's something going on here every weekend for the next significant amount of time. And just to make this a very brief comment, but Mary, when you say being afraid of doing something wrong with the ritual, and you say, well, I haven't experienced that in Buddhism. Well, I have. And you were just scared as heck to like do something wrong under some person who was like the and what kind of scolding you're going to get. And so this Just Sitting retreat is kind of interesting. They have two rules, the way I understand it. Number one, no one talks. And number two, especially, no one tells anyone else they're doing something wrong. So those are the two rules, as far as I understand it. So I think that comes out of some history. Won't go into much more detail about it, but anyway. Okay, the next speaker for Sunday next week is Onru, G.D. Kennedy. After that, I will be giving the Dharma talk. And with that, I think we will close with the 4 vows, of which I will lead. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you all, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Jushin.